Lady from New Mexico.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for testifying. Representative Duncan, if the bipartisan security supplemental appropriation bill were brought to the floor, of which we are hopeful that it does, would you vote for it?
I haven't seen the bill to read it, tell you whether I'd vote for it or not. We'd definitely look at it.
Yeah, so it's in the Senate. It's, we've all read a lot about it. But one of the reasons...
That's probably why I haven't seen it since it's in the Senate.
It's because in the Senate. One of the reasons I asked that is I appreciated your comments and concern about our European allies and the need to bring down natural gas prices and to help out our European allies and to help out with, the volatile energy market. And the reality is that Russia's invasion of Ukraine created a volatility in the energy markets that led to a 42% increase in energy costs. It led to gasoline costing $1.48 more than it did before the war. And the fact that, so I think that when we have those in the House who are pushing back against providing support to Ukraine, it's just wrong, because that Russia invasion and what Putin has done has not been good for anybody with regards to energy prices. And it's that volatility in the energy prices that I think, there's lots of different reasons why we should support our allies in our democracies against Putin, a dictator or authoritarian, lots of awful things. But that's one of them. And it just struck me when you were sort of expressing your support for helping our European allies. But I wanted to also touch on this concept that we need to do this now because of oil and gas. Oil and gas production is at its highest levels. And it could be at its highest levels and also having some of the highest levels of profit. And I'm from New Mexico, so when we have high oil and gas production, it's actually good for us, right? But at the same time, in New Mexico, we are very concerned about how do we improve the health and safety of especially the workers, because when there's a lot of methane emissions, the workers are the ones who are breathing that. But it's also a resource that we are losing if it is not being captured. And so we actually adopted some of the more forward-looking methane regulations in the United States. And you know what happened with oil and gas productions when we increased methane regulations? Are you aware of what happened in New Mexico?
I'm not. Tell me.
Yeah. Guess what? Oil and gas production went up, which shows that regulating for the climate and regulating for oil and gas does not necessarily reduce production. And are you supportive of capturing methane emissions?
I am, and I think the industry's done a phenomenal job in addressing methane. They're not flaring as much. They're actually capturing much and using it.
And I thank you for that, because that's exactly what the industry itself says, is that they believe that reduction of methane emissions is essential, and they actually welcome regulations to do that. And I'm very, concerned because of the fact that we have so much methane emissions going on. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record, seek unanimous consent to enter into the record the article U.S. oil and gas system emissions from nearly 1 million aerial site measurements.
Without objection.
And the shorter article, that's a nice long study done by Stanford, the shorter article describing it, which is U.S. energy industry methane emissions are triple what government thinks.
Without objection.
And I'm thankful, Mr. Stauber, are you in favor of capturing methane emissions from productions?
I'll respond the same way as Representative Duncan. I agree.
I'm sorry, what?
I'll respond the same way as Representative Duncan. I agree. He said it very well.
Okay. And I think that's really great. And what I would suggest that we do is actually, I have an amendment that I am seeking to actually encourage and help pursue that methane reduction, because it shows, the study shows that there are actually not that many sites that are responsible for about half of methane emissions, and that we could really bring down global warming by doing some of this low-hanging fruit. And so I would hope that you would also be supportive of amendments which encourage that kind of methane reduction. I see it's such a powerful argument that I'm even losing my my label, but because I was out, I go out in my district. I go out, and when I meet with my producers, they are in favor of methane reduction tools, and so that's why I'm looking for support for that kind of sensible regulation that brings down greenhouse gases, that builds on the Inflation Reduction Act, because we know it's not always sensible. Representative Dingell, we had some comments earlier about bonding and that we really don't have much of a problem with regards to oil and gas producers who sometimes walk away from their obligations. I actually carried a bill to address the orphan wells, and we ended up with about $4 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act to address the fact that way too many producers had walked away from their obligations to clean up their mess. And so the taxpayer was left holding the bag. Can you respond to some of the comments with regards to the problems around bonding and their adequacy?
I would be happy to. We have heard the Republicans say that bonding reform isn't needed to make sure the oil and gas industry cleans up its own mess, saying that BLM has identified only 37 orphan wells, but that's not the complete picture. An unplugged well can sit idled or even abandoned for many, many years before a federal agency seeks to enforce reclamation requirements and finally declare it officially orphaned. That process eats up valuable staff time and resources, but in that time, these unplugged wells can leak oil and gas, creating environmental and public health hazards, regardless of whether they've been officially deemed an orphaned or not. And we're talking huge numbers. In 2019, nonpartisan GAO identified 2,294 unplugged wells that have not produced in over 10 years. The oil and gas industry should pay to plug and remediate those wells, not the American people.
Thank you for pointing that out. In New Mexico alone, we've done a new mapping, and we've showed that there are 2,391 currently documented orphan wells in our state alone. And in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, and in other places, this is a big problem. And so we cannot hide the fact that there are those who want to be responsible. Like when I met with Chevron, they were like, we want to do right, we want to do right. But there are so many others who walk away from their obligations. So thank you for pointing that out. The last little thing that I'm concerned about, and I'll let you, Mr. Representative Tonko, address the fact that these funds that want to be slashed, who are the people who most benefit from the funds that would get cut?
That would get cut. Certainly the rural communities and in lower income communities, neighborhoods of color oftentimes, who are impacted by these emissions. I think it's important for us to recognize that we can do a lot to improve their quality of life. Their public health is responded to with a measure like that Inflation Reduction Act. There's also talk, if I can address an earlier statement about technologies and reaching to other countries to respond to our needs. There are provisions within the Inflation Reduction Act that require that Build America, Buy America provisions are applicable across the board to these projects. So, for many reasons, I think the efforts here are counterproductive to, addressing the industry itself, because to your point, there are benefits that come with them. This is waste for them also, but also comes to benefits for our consumers and those in special certain territories and geographies, and also the planet benefits.
One of the wonderful things about all of the things that we were talking about there, including the Inflation Reduction Act, is they actually create good paying jobs, right? When we build more pipeline to capture the methane that can power big rigs and that can, create electricity for our companies, we're actually creating jobs for people who are working in the oil patch, who have those skills that we can actually have those good paying jobs. When we plug those orphan wells, we are creating jobs. We have a lot of new rigs now that actually are plugging rigs, and those are good paying jobs. And so I think that we need to recognize that this is like a win-win, right? It's a win for the environment, it's a win for the economy, it's a win for the workers who do this work. And I know, Representative Dingell, you know that many of these are also union workers. And so we are talking about stuff that is good for America and for American workers. Is that correct?
That's correct. We've created more than 200,000 jobs just on EVs and batteries. So, and we're creating more and more. We want to bring those jobs home. I am not going to let China beat us at anything. I want us to stay at the forefront of innovation and technology. I'm not old, but I'm seasoned. I remember the 70s when we lost to Japan for a decade because we weren't ready for the small car market. We can't cede our leadership again. And these policies that we are pushing forward are protecting jobs, bringing jobs home. We want to build them here. We want to lead the global market.
Right, and because we can do something better here, we should do it here, we should build it here, and we should clean it up here with our own workers. And thank you, and with that, I yield back.